Woo!
All right, so that's
Good to
it.
be
We're
back.
live. We're live on Facebook, back with Andres.
Howdy.
And we said we were going to be live on YouTube this week, and an email earlier today said we were going to be live on YouTube. That was a lie. We are not live on YouTube. So if you are watching on YouTube, I don't know how you are watching on YouTube, but if you're watching on Facebook and somebody is asking you about YouTube, just tell them, we're not on YouTube. So back doing it again. We have a bunch of questions. I have them printed out here, ready to go. People have been sending them in by email, and then also I'm watching the chat. Let me arrange my Zoom window so that I can see. So if you're in the chat, you can ask a question live, and if you're if we have time, we'll get to it, or if it's super interesting, we'll get to it. Andres Amitai Wilson, welcome.
Good to be here. Thanks, Chris.
The brief bio: accomplished guitarist, real serious music school graduate, music teacher of many years. How many years?
Oh my gosh. I'm already feeling long in the tooth, and now I'm going to share that information. Let me see, about almost 20 years. But in my defense, I started teaching music when I was in high school, so do the math.
So you couldn't be older than what I actually happen to know that we're about the same age, so I know exactly how old you are. So we're gonna do the same format as last week. I have a list of questions. We're gonna get to them. Before we get to them, if you are watching this not Facebook Live, if you're not actually in the chat right now and leaving us comments, and want to next week or whenever the next one of these is, go to chordbank.com/live and you can sign up, and we'll let you know when they're coming, which will be really good. And you can also send your questions so that I make sure that they get in front of a professional like Andres, maybe even Andres himself, depending on how today goes, whether he'll do it again.
No pressure. Oh my gosh.
No. Not, all in your hands. All in your hands. So maybe we'll start with a question from Bill C. He had 3 questions, but I wanted to use the first question first because it is a question that I've gotten from time to time, and it's kind of specific, which I thought would be a good one to kick us off.
Great.
So he writes, I have smaller hands, which is bad enough, but also have double-jointed thumbing my fretting hand. So I think that means like he has a double-jointed thumb in his fretting hand.
Huh.
Is there any information out there to overcome this? So have you had students with small hands, with trouble with small hands, students with different abilities in their fingers, dexterity?
Wow, that's a really good question, Bill. And I am ashamed to admit I don't think I've ever had a student with a double-jointed thumb. It sounds like it would be more of an asset than a hindrance, but I don't know. I'd have to see the way that your thumb moves. As far as the small fingers go, it's just a case of arching your fingers properly. And even if you have small fingers, I think if you're applying the right amount of pressure and playing in the middle of the fret rather than, close to the metal frets themselves, you should be able to overcome that. I mean, I've worked with young students who I imagine have smaller hands than you. So I would say work on the arching first and foremost. Now, I don't know about your thumb. Maybe the thumb makes it a challenge for you to reinforce your fretting hand. I could see that very well being the case. I really wish I could see your thumb to answer this question since it's such a specific question. And specific questions are excellent.
Bill, if you're in the live, send a photo of your thumb, please. I think you can drop it into the chat.
Yeah, or maybe a basic chord that Bill knows, like just a shot of him playing that chord, and that could maybe reveal some of the challenges that he's encountering. That would be useful.
You can send it to either info@chordbank.com or questions@chordbank.com. They all go to the same place. And if you send a picture, we will look at it again. But talk more about that finger placement, like within the fret, because that's something that I've had questions about before. I've heard the advice to be like right up as close to the fret as possible, but then you were talking just about being kind of in the middle of the fret. Talk about the difference of like, what's the difference about where you put your finger?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, I mean, a lot of people, when they learn about frets, they think that that means you're going to play right on the metal bar, and that's, I'd say, precisely what you don't want to do. It's much better to be in the middle of a fret and pushing down. You're going to get a better sound. You're going to have more control once you arch your fingers, and you're going to have less ambiguity of the note as well. Because, like, I mean, if you play, I mean, this is such a minor thing, but it's like a microtonal thing. But if you're playing, like, let's say, really close to the fret on this side or really close to the fret on that side, if you're really paying attention, it's almost like bending the note just slightly. And so it's going to sound kind of different if you're doing this right in the middle as opposed to maybe this. Slightly different, right? And maybe, you know, it's not something that you can necessarily perceive. But
how does it affect, like, the amount of pressure that you have to use if you're in different spots?
It doesn't really make a difference, to be honest. The only time where you really have to play over the frets is for harmonic. In order to get those notes, you need to be right over the fret. And slide players, I have a slide in the room, but I'm not going to get up. I have slide players play right directly over the fret as well for their intonation. So if you hear like a great guitar player like Derek Trucks or Dwayne Allman or something like that, they're playing right over the fret in order to get the slide sounds that they get. But if you're playing chords in any other way, the best is to be right in the middle of the fret. It's going to be easier for you to play that way. Your intonation's going to be better. Classical players, by the way, there's a thing called vibrato, right? And blues and rock players, jazz players tend to do vibrato like, right? Just bending up and down on the string. Classical players do vibrato by moving within the fret, right, to get that sound. So that kind of shows you the difference in the microtones, that you can get microtones depending on where you are.
Why is that? Because they don't want to bend the pitch as much?
I don't know why it is. I know that's just the practice. You know, there are different types of vibratos. It's kind of like if you're bending a string, some people bend up and some people bend down, right? It's a preference, and I'm sure the effects are subtle but different.
I got you.
Yeah.
Nice. I see we have some people coming into the live. If you are watching now, and you can put on your news feed like, "Hey, I'm watching this cool thing," that would really help to get other people in here. That'd be awesome. That's one of the promo-y things I'm gonna do. I'm gonna move on to a question from Sandra I think she's from Canada. Her email address says Rogers in it, which I think is a Canadian internet company.
Huh.
Anyway, she wanted to be here last week, but it was her birthday, and she had a birthday dinner.
Happy birthday!
So a week late, Andres.
Okay, well, sorry.
She says, as a beginner, I find it easier to strum with my thumb rather than with the pick. At this stage, should I be disciplining myself to be using the pick?
Not necessarily. If you feel more comfortable with the thumb, I think strumming with the thumb, how can I put this? It's more limiting in some respects, depending on the style of music that you want to play, because it's harder to do upstrokes. But a lot of like R&B music uses the thumb. You see a lot of great R&B players just doing all downstrokes with the thumb. Right, that sounds fine. It really, I think it's a question of what kind of music you want to play, right? And obviously strumming with up and down strokes is an ability that you want to have when you're playing the instrument, because it gives you more options if you want to play in lots of different styles. You could do that with the fingers. You could do that with a pick. It's a little harder to do it with the thumb, but there are even some famous guitar players who played only with the thumb. Wes Montgomery, who's kind of the Jimi Hendrix of jazz guitar, right? Played with a thumb, and he played fast single note lines just with his thumb. I don't even know how he did it. It's just incredible. But he was able to do that. So there's nothing necessarily wrong with just using your thumb. It might be limiting depending on what styles you want to play.
When you have people coming in and it's kind of their first lesson, they're just getting started, at what point do you start getting people to use the pick? Because it's something you have to understand how to hold it, what to do with it.
Right. I try to inculcate those sorts of techniques from the beginning, because I think if it becomes second nature to you, then no matter what style you want to play, you'll be able to play it well. You'll have like the technical foundation. And I prefer using the pick because that's the way that I learned how to play. If you're a classical player, you have beautiful finger technique and you don't need the pick, or great finger style players don't need a pick, but they're still able to do things in the way that I can use a pick and even beyond what I can do with the pick.
Sure.
A thumb might be limiting. That's all I'm saying, depending on what you want to play. If you're just strumming, no problem. If that's all you want to do, and in the R&B style, it's definitely called for, you know?
What's the first, supposing that you want to teach somebody how to play with a pick, like what's the first thing that you teach them?
The first thing that I would teach people is to do up and down strokes.
Okay,
so
but even holding the pick, like how do you teach them how to hold it? Do they generally have it pretty much doing fine?
Yeah, that's a good question. Unless I see something that seems really aberrant, I wouldn't address it. Like if someone were holding a pick like this, I would probably tell them not to do that. It's not going to be very useful. But, you know, so many great guitar players hold the pick differently and have incredible technique. The late, great Eddie Van Halen held his pick like this between his thumb and his middle finger.
Can you move your hand up so that your hand is like, so that you get some wall in between your...
Move
it to your right?
Move it to my right. Okay.
Other right. I want that corner of wall.
Oh, okay.
To be yeah. And then you can move it closer, but just basically keep your hand like by the white part. So yeah, show me. Eddie Van Halen did this. It's between the thumb and the middle finger. So he did that. That was his style. That's the way he felt comfortable holding a pick. Partially, he developed some of his tapping style, right? And then he could go back to doing, right, and alternate between using a pick and tapping because he did it this way. Okay. Often, when people first learn how to use a pick, they do the index finger and the middle finger. That's what everybody says to do. I actually use both the index finger and the middle finger and the thumb. So I'm using 3. And that's comfortable for me. What I would say, I've never seen anyone do it like this, but I imagine there is someone who does it like this. And I've never seen anyone do it like that. And that seems incredibly awkward to me and inefficient. But I think any of the other ones that I've shown you would work perfectly fine. And even if you feel comfortable doing this, I mean, there has to be someone who does it like this. I don't think it's necessarily wrong. It's not going to be a hindrance. It's what's most comfortable to you. But you know, sorry, go ahead. Oh no, I was just going to say that. So you got them holding the pick somehow, and then you were saying you start them off on down and up strings
down and up,
basically.
Yes, and on single notes. So one of the first exercises that I do with students, it's not the most musical thing, but it is something that you can do just to get accustomed to down and up strokes. Is to go string by string and do down up with a metronome. And try to make it even. So da 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 da. And even then, my upstroke is accenting a little bit more. And if you can make it smooth and even, that's great. Another thing that people sometimes do with the pick, and you might notice I'm doing this, is I'm anchoring my wrist on the bridge by extending my pinky. Not everyone does that. That's just something that I learned along the way that was useful to me because it helped me to palm mute, to use the fleshy part of my hand against the pick board to block out any extraneous sounds. If I didn't do that, then I might get, right? But I'm doing this, and all of a sudden, I'm only hearing the notes I want to hear. So I would have a student do that on the high E string.
And your arm isn't moving at all.
It isn't moving at all. And then I go to the B string. Same thing. G string. D string, etc., etc. Once that feels comfortable, I give students exercises between 2 strings. So doing alternate picking on 1 string is a lot easier than doing it on 2 strings. So I might do like some sort of a melodic motif. And I grew up playing a lot of shred and like sort of fast rock guitar. So one of the main riffs that people give you to work on your alternate picking that works for all styles, but it's just so simple that I give it to students, is to take the last 4 notes in a minor scale and do this pattern. Just start off very slowly, and what I'm doing there is on the B string, I start on the 5th fret of the B string, my index finger. I do the 6th fret of the B string with my middle finger, and the pinky on the 8th fret, and I'm doing with the right hand, down, up, down, okay? So down, up, and then that last up is on the 5th fret of the E string. So I'm practicing the mechanics of alternate picking in a very easy way across 2 strings. And then you can work it up with a metronome. And you could do that across any 2 sets of strings, but it's most common to do it on the B to the E string. You could do it up here. And with a metronome, of course, so that you're building that technique and it's smooth and even. And, not everybody wants to play in like a virtuosic style or anything like that, but just to have that technical facility, and you can play anything with a pick and it comes more easily to you.
Gotcha. While you brought up the concept of metronome, there was one buried from I got a bunch of questions that had come in through the ChordBank app through the email over the years, and one of the questions was about how to use a metronome, having a metronome app, but not really feeling like they know what to do with it, how to apply it to exercises. So when you talk about doing that exercise with a metronome, do you start them off at a certain tempo and then tell them to double it, or do you tell them to increase by so many BPM once you feel like you have it down? Like, what do you basically tell your students to do?
Great. Sorry, I'm just pulling up an online metronome and I'll demonstrate.
Sure. Yeah, awesome.
Are you able to hear that?
No.
You're not. Okay.
But I have one that
you have
I can
one.
do here.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Here, and then I'll hold it up. So it'll even be on TV.
Great.
All right, hold on. It's in this rad app.
Nice. My phone is across the room, and I'm so connected right now, I don't want to move.
What, can you see, what BPM would you like?
Oh, I think I've heard of that app. What a fantastic app.
What BPM would you like?
Let's start with 80. Let's start with 80, and then we'll move it up a little bit.
Okay. Can you hear that?
I can. So I would start with quarter notes, let's say. I should start on the 1, 4. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. And of course the timing gets a little off because this is really a 16-note exercise. But I would have students gradually get faster and faster. And really what you're supposed to do for an exercise like this is these are supposed to be 16th notes. That's how you keep the rhythmic feel. 2.
Do you want me to remove the accent?
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you, Chris. 3. So you could even make it 8th notes, right? So that was quarter notes. That was 1, 2, 3, 4. I could make it. Now it's 8th notes, right? Now see if I can make it 16th notes. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. So that's 4 notes per beat. I technically wouldn't have someone shift that quickly because I'm basically doubling the speed with each variation. But yeah. I mean, just to move up slowly and have that facility. I guess starting with the very first example with this one, right? You could do 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, then 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a, right? And once you can do that cleanly every time, then you can make it a little faster if you wish, or maybe you'll say that's all I need, and I have the facility with the pick.
Do you, if they're going to make it faster, do you recommend going like 1 BPM faster, 10, 20? Like how do you have them step it up?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So back in the in the Jurassic period when I first started playing guitar, we didn't have metronomes on smartphones, but I did have a digital metronome, and it moved up in, I think, 4 BPMs. So like you couldn't really do, let's say we were just on 80. I couldn't move to 81 or 82. I think it was like the increments were 80, 84, 88, 92, et cetera, et cetera. So I think I got into the habit of practicing. If I really sort of crushed something, I would move it up by 4 and try it then, because that's the way my metronome worked. But it's up to you.
Sure.
I wouldn't go from 80 to 100 right away, right? Unless 80 seems like ridiculously easy for you, and in which case, unless you want to shred, you don't really need to be doing that exercise if you're just trying to develop some facility. If your goal is to get like ridiculously fast, then by all means, like keep going. See what your limits are.
So bump it up by like a handful at a time. Basically.
Yeah.
I had when I was young and taking piano lessons, my metronome was not electronic at all. It was one of those weighted ones that's like the drinking bird. Basically.
Those are so cool.
And I did not have a. I don't know what the increment was, but it certainly wasn't one either.
Yeah, interesting. I would assume the digital metronomes followed after the cool kind of old school metronome that I wish I had. I had one at my house that didn't work, so I never practiced with it, but it looked cool.
eBay, man.
Yeah, true.
I've gone through phases of buying a lot of old stuff on eBay like that, and I haven't gone through the buy an old metronome phase, but I feel like maybe it's coming. There was one more thing from Sandra. I hope that answered your question. Drop a line in the chat if there's something you want us to clear up. But last week when she was writing, she was saying, I just started picking up the guitar after Christmas, learning the A, D, and E chords so far. I am enjoying playing these chord changes and pumped to learn more now that my fingers don't hurt so much. So I just wanted to bring up this concept, and there's another question, I think, from this batch that talks about your fingers hurting. Everybody goes through that. How long does it usually take? When you were working with students, like how long are they complaining that their fingers are killing them? Should they be practicing more or less while they're kind of getting their calluses developed? Like, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would always advocate for practicing consistently rather than practicing more. So if you're going to practice for 2 hours and be really, enthusiastic or maybe even overzealous about it, and then not practice for a week, that's not going to help you. And by the time you stop with your 2 hours and it's painful, but you've made progress, you wait a week, the calluses start to heal, and then you're back at it again. I would say rather than doing that, do 10 or 15 minutes every day, and it might not, hurt. It might hurt a little bit, but you're still making progress, and you come back to the instrument, it hurts a little bit, but you're making progress, and the next thing you know, it's not going to hurt. So I highly recommend that. It does hurt for everyone until you develop those calluses. And it's better to do like short but consistent intervals on a daily basis than to like do 2 or 3 hours and then put the instrument down for a month.
If you see people actually practicing 10 minutes, 15 minutes a day, about how long is it before you usually probably see students once a week or so.
Yeah.
About how many times when you see them are they to the point where they're like, oh, okay, this is not killing me anymore?
A month or so, if they're practicing consistently. If it's the case that I just mentioned, where sometimes with young children, it hurts them so much that they're put off, and then the only time they touch the instrument is when they step into the classroom or the guitar lesson. Then they're like, oh, what was I supposed to do again? And it hurts my fingers. But if you can get over that hump, which for adults, I would say a month, if you're practicing consistently, probably less, but. Just so as not to call my bluff, let's say a month.
Sure.
And by that time, it doesn't bother you. It's really more about other things, like how am I arching my fingers? Am I getting all the sounds I can get, or am I getting this kind of thing, right? And even this kind of thing, I think, is often just apprehension on the student's part to push down on the strings because it has that strange sensation that takes a while to get used to.
That is what, yeah. It's I had two reactions to that. One was I notice now, even if I don't play for a long time, it doesn't hurt as much as it did when I was first. I don't remember how much it hurt when I was first learning, but it doesn't seem there must be some residual callus, or maybe it's just what you were talking about, the feeling that stays there. I don't know.
Yeah,
I've been playing a while.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Chris. I think the more you do it, I don't know if it's a physiological thing or what, but it doesn't hurt after a while. I think you just have to get used to the sensation, and then the calluses come too, right? And that's kind of gross, but it helps you to play guitar. So,
My sister is back in the comments, which is very exciting, and she says she has nylon strings and it really helps.
Great.
And that is actually a great segue to one of the questions from. Oh, it's another Bill question.
Oh.
I didn't mean to do two Bill questions in a row, but I'm going to do it anyway. So he asks what's kind of become a cliche question that I get a lot, and that we kind of touched on last time, which is acoustic versus electric, which is better for a beginner? And last time you had kind of said it depends on what kind of music you want to play.
Yeah.
If you have a student that is like a kid and maybe doesn't know what they want to play, or an adult that really could go either way, do you lean them one way or another?
That's a really good question. I think considering the idea of calluses and the tension on your fingers, I will say that acoustic guitar strings are thicker. So often if you learn everything on an acoustic and then you switch to an electric, you're going to be surprised at how much easier everything seems because the gauge of the strings is much smaller on electric, right? It's thinner strings. So playing a D, which is pretty standard but pretty easy chord on an acoustic, even if you struggle with it, then you'll move to the electric and it'll be nothing for you. So I think sometimes that's why people say to start on an acoustic. Another thing is, I think, depending on what style of music you listen to, we have this kind of tendency to really like gadgets. And if you're playing with an electric guitar, gadgets are one of the main things. I mean, I'm mainly an electric guitarist. I love electric guitar, and I love using distortion and all these weird effects and whatnot. But, I mean, when you're playing an acoustic guitar, you have to make it sound good without those effects. So sometimes people say, learn on acoustic, because if you can make an acoustic guitar sound good, then you move over to electric, and you have all these kind of like, I don't know, like hacks that can help you to sound even better. And I see that. I see the logic in that, and I think it makes sense. I still would contend that it depends on what kind of music you like. I've had students who their parents bought them an acoustic guitar. They didn't practice. They weren't into it at all. These are kids. But then they asked for an electric for their birthday, and within like 6 months, they were soaring. They were playing everything. They just needed that sound. And once they heard that sound, it really gave them enthusiasm about the instrument. So that's why I still contend that. But yeah, definitely, if you're playing acoustic first, when you move over to electric, things will feel a bit easier for you.
If you do, right?
If you do, right?
If you, to your earlier point, like if you consider it too hard, you might not get there.
Right. Yeah, good point. Sorry.
Go ahead, sorry.
I'll just say one other thing that if you're an acoustic player and you want to move beyond just strumming. And you're getting into finger picking, some of that stuff is much harder than some of the electric techniques that you'll be involved in. Like, I mean, if you're doing shredding or tapping or any of that kind of stuff, you can do that kind of stuff on an acoustic as well. But sort of complex finger picking doesn't even really necessarily sound good on an electric. So if you learn that, it'll be great and you'll sound awesome on an acoustic, but that wouldn't necessarily transfer over to the electric. That's the only one case that I would say is sort of more like the two instruments are very different.
Gotcha.
The things that you'd be playing on it.
Nice. That's good advice. I'm going to go to a question from our friend Maria.
Maria!
She's back. Maria, MVP of last ChordBank Live. I could not let another one go by without her. So her question from this week is, as an advanced beginner, how can I take a tab? I want to actually underline that to talk about later. How can I take a tab with some chords and do little embellishments to make it sound more professional? I think she was really inspired by some of the stuff you were doing last time. So she says pull-offs, hammer-ons, play a few notes from a related scale, etc. Maybe give an example. So I think she's talking about like kind of dressing up something that she maybe just learned the chords to and wants to kind of make it more interesting.
Okay, I'm thinking of an example I could give.
Sure.
Yeah, so let's take a somewhat simple song. Let me just check my tuning here. So one thing that will help is having an understanding of which key you're in. and then you can always add things. So one of the little hacks that I like to do, let's say that you're doing a D chord, right? There are all these suspensions that you can use in like a regular open chord setting that sound pretty cool. So I could do this. What I mean by a suspension is adding a note that isn't really in the chord, right? So if we're thinking of a D, the chords we have, the notes we have in a D are going to be a D, an F sharp, and an A. The F sharp is the third. If we're doing a suspended chord, right, or adding suspensions, we're going to get rid of the third and add something else there. That's a lot of theory, so don't think too much about it unless it interests you or if you understand it. But just to know that this chord shape, a D, has two different suspensions you can throw into it to spruce it up a little. And a lot of folk guitarists do this. So even if you're working with basic chords, you don't have to do... I was thinking of the song Last Dance with Mary Jane by Tom Petty, right? So you have this A minor, G, D, A minor, right? That's just strumming it normally. But what if I wanted to spruce it up a little bit? Well, I could take that D chord, and rather than doing a D, I could do this sort of folky thing where I do a sus2. See that little addition I'm doing? So I'm hammering on the third. I'm starting by doing D open, and all the rest is the same, except I have the E string open as well. And I'm hammering on the third there. So that makes it sound a little more interesting. So let's take Last Dance with Mary Jane again. It sounds a little more interesting with that little hammer on, right? And I would say as a general rule, you can hammer on to the third. You can use these sort of sus, and D has another sus there, and it's sus4. And I'm hammering on. That would be in more of a folk style. This works in like an R&B neo-soul style too if you're adding the third. So I could take a major 7, D major 7 here. The third would be here if we're taking in this, right? This is a basic major 7 chord. I don't have to just strum it. I can do... So you can always hammer on the third more or less and it sounds pretty good. I could do it with a minor chord. Right? And that's a slight addition that a lot of more advanced, more sophisticated guitar players do that sounds really cool, but it's not really that big of a deal. You're just hammering on to the third, and it kind of brings things to life a little bit. I would say learning slight variations of basic chords, even if you took something like a G, right? You don't have to do this G. You could do this G too. A G, but I'm just adding some notes, knowing that sort of thing, knowing that you can do a C, but you can also do a C add 9. So that's a C, but rather than doubling the root here, I'm adding my pinky to the 3rd fret of B. Right? So knowing just how to put your own sort of sauce on the chords, and all of those sauces, all of those sort of changes that I'm making are things that many guitar players know how to do once they get to the more intermediate level, and you could do it in almost every song. There are some cases where you can't do it, and if like the key is kind of weird, and there are certain like little fills that you can't do because they wouldn't fit, but anytime you're just adding the third, it pretty much works, and it's safe to do.
That's nice. Yeah, that's one question that comes up from time to time is like which chords are compatible and which are, like this comes up a lot if people are looking at some of the more kind of exotic chords with lots of tensions on them.
Yeah.
Do you have a general rule? And then there's something I wanted to touch on about that question, and then there's 2 questions in the chat that I want to get to. And if you have questions and you want to put them in the chat, go for it. We will get to them. There's still plenty of time. But can you talk just briefly about which chords are kind of interchangeable and kind of conserve the same function? You talked a little bit about it just now with those suspended chords and the add chords, but
yeah, I would recommend if you can, as soon as you feel comfortable with the open with the open chords like G, C, D, etc., to learn the ninth variations, the add 9 variations of those, because they add color and they are kind of interchangeable, with some exceptions. So, for example, I could do an A minor, right, and that sounds perfectly fine. But what if I wanted to spruce that up a little bit and make it this? All I did is move one note, and all of a sudden I have a 9, A minor 9, right? It sounds so much prettier, right? Or it's the same thing with E major 9, right? And I'm just adding that 9th note. So I would say for every open chord that you've learned, once you're at the intermediate level, see if you can learn the 9 chords. A regular E minor is like this, but an E minor 9 is like this. So much more color, right? And I'm just changing one note, and it still works.
That's cool. That's awesome advice. Awesome, actionable advice as always. I'm gonna see how much like announcer shtick I can get on this interaction between you and me. There was something from that question that I circled as I was reading it that occurred to me. Maria, I'll read the question. Started as an advanced beginner. How can I
Yeah.
I just had a question. Like, how do you think about levels of people in their journey as they're learning? Do you subscribe to that? Do you kind of like categorize your students in certain ways and say like, oh, this person is kind of like at this stage, so I should give her or him this thing? Can you talk about that? Like, do you kind of ascribe to the concept of levels or not?
I do to a point. I mean, once people develop some facility, then it really depends on the style. Like, I mean, there are styles where I don't want to say I'm a master, but I would say like I can hold my own. And there are other styles where I'm an advanced student, where like I can achieve all this stuff, but I'm not great at it, right? And so I think once you get to a certain level, the question is like where your tastes guide you. But yes, in terms of like beginner through intermediate levels, I think there are certain things that people should kind of know how to do, somewhat independently of what they want to learn. So knowing all your chords, knowing all your bar chords, knowing movable scales, things like that, I think are essential. But then after that, it's like I have students who are incredible blues players, and that's what they want to do. And they play the blues, and it blows me away. But if I ask them to play some sort of wacky chord, they wouldn't know what I was talking about. And then I have people who know all their chords, but can't improvise, and they're still somewhat advanced, right? So it depends on where your tastes lead you. But that's a really good question, Chris.
Where would you draw the line kind of between like a beginner, intermediate, and an intermediate student, or maybe a beginner, advanced beginner, intermediate student? Like, how would you kind of categorize those students in terms of like the skills?
Yeah, so like specific skills.
Yeah.
Okay. I'd say, a beginner maybe has a handful of chords.
I don't know if we lost Andres.
Oh. Hello? Did you lose me, Chris? Am I here?
It might be me. I actually see you. I see you now. Sorry.
Okay, great. All right. You can hear me all right?
Yes, everything's good now. Sorry.
Fantastic. I would say a beginner knows a handful of chords. If they want to start learning how to read music, maybe they know a couple of, the notes on, say, the high E string or the B string, or maybe not. Maybe they know a scale or two. I'd say someone more intermediate knows all of their open chords, but maybe they're still struggling with some bar chords. And maybe they know a couple bar chords, but it doesn't sound like fully there. Maybe they know a couple scales, they know a handful of songs, but they're still working on making it sound great. I think someone who's upper intermediate like knows a lot of stuff, but hasn't really made it their own yet. And I think a more advanced person is kind of like they have a lot of stuff down, but they maybe don't have their own sound yet. Like they can play all the songs, but if you said like, okay, how do you sound? What's your thing? They'd struggle to do that. And I think that's where I say that for myself, in some genres, I'm kind of an advanced player, even though I've been playing for many years, because I have all the technique. I obviously know what's going on. But like, if you asked me to play jazz, I would sound like people I've heard playing jazz. I wouldn't sound like myself. Whereas if you asked me to play blues, I would probably sound like myself, because that's a genre that I tend to thrive in a little bit more. So it all depends on the person's journey and what kind of styles they like to play and what they're interested in.
A quick plug for your Instagram where you do a lot of playing that sounds like yourself. It's and really and some, I love sometimes like I'll go on there and you've got some like riffs from other people, or you make something up, or you take off. I really enjoy like your Instagram.
Oh, thank you, Chris. I appreciate that.
But it's Andres A. Wilson, is that right?
That's it. Yeah.
There you go. Okay, so I want to do a couple of comments from the live chat, and put your comments in there if you are not already. I'll start with Marty Peters, who's the latest comment, and he said, do you have any recommendations for an older guy who got away from playing for many years and is trying to get back into it? Frustrations come from not being able to just sit down and play the way I used to. So this is kind of a different take on a question we answered last time, which was more like, I think the question was like, how do you approach teaching an older player versus a younger player? But this is different. It sounds like Marty used to play quite a bit, but things aren't coming back to him. Like, do you ever have any students like that? Do you have any advice for him?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wouldn't want to ask a personal question, but I'm wondering what kept him away from the instrument. And I think just like picking it up, and like, I've gone through phases in my life where, believe it or not, even though guitar is a big part of my life, one of the biggest parts, where I didn't play for a couple months. Like, I just didn't touch the instrument, but then I touched it again, and then sometimes I won't put it down, right? So I'm curious.
I would bet it's longer than that.
Longer than that, yeah.
I would bet he played when he was in his teens and 20s, and now he's in his 60s or something. I bet it's decades since he's touched a guitar.
Yeah, I would say just, pick it up again. Try to figure out some sort of activity that will keep you in the game. Like, if you're able to get together with folks masked and socially distanced and rocking out in a garage, then by all means do that. And I actually played with a bunch of guys who were in their 60s and 70s, some professional and some who weren't. And they basically had this thing. They got together once a month, and they picked an era or a year. So they'd say like 1954, and they'd list all of the songs that were on the charts in 1954, and you'd have to learn like 10 of them, like, over the course of June, let's say. And they'd get together in July and just jam in a garage on these random songs from 1954. And, it kind of incentivized practicing in a cool way, and it was social. And, even though I was a professional musician, I would sometimes go and hang out with them, and I learned a lot of tunes that I wouldn't have learned otherwise, because why do you just randomly choose a year and learn a bunch of tunes from that year, unless it's for a gig, right? So, I found that very useful. So if there's some way he can incentivize playing the instrument, it sounds like the passion is there and the skill is still there, but something to kind of, I don't know, like
sometimes
awaken
you just don't know what to do.
Yeah, that's true. I'd be curious what he started playing when he picked up the instrument again. Were there songs that he used to play really well and he'd forgotten and he started rocking out on and couldn't play it anymore?
Nice.
What happened?
Well, let's move on. But Marty, tell us more. If you tell us more, we will talk about it more before we have to wrap it up. That actually ties in with another question. I want to make sure I find it so I actually read it properly. Nope, I can't find it. Doesn't matter. I'll pick something else. Okay, so we'll go to. I'm gonna butcher your name. I'm so sorry. Jay Naira Nasir had a couple of questions. He or she said, "I have a hard time with bar chords, and I also want to know how to mute sounds." So we talked a lot about bar chords last time. So maybe start on muting. Maybe like when we talk about muting, first of all, what does that mean to you? There's like palm muting. There's other. How do you interpret that question? Basically?
Yeah, that's great. So I think muting. Obviously, if you're using the right hand, you're thinking of bar chords. You want to think about palm muting, using the fleshy part of your palm, lightly resting it close to the bridge, but not right on the bridge, right, of your guitar. That blocks out the extraneous noises. If you're doing more like alternative rock kind of stuff, Smells Like Teen Spirit. Now, the reason why I actually thought of that song is because in that song you have to mute in 2 places. So you have the palm muting in the right hand, right? And if you go like that, I'm not hearing just the notes I want to hear. But with Smells Like Teen Spirit, you're also muting with the left hand. So it shows you 2 ways you can do. You have the, and then you release the pressure on the left hand and go, so you're blocking out the sound. So you can mute with the left hand by just lightly resting your fingers across the strings. You can drape them. You can just do them like this. I like to do it like that so I don't get out of position to play the next thing I want to do, right? So really, I think muting, there are 2 different ways that you can mute, and depending on the style of music you're playing, like if you're playing slide, you have to get good with muting both with the left and the right hand. If you're playing a lot of alternative stuff that has the kind of like, you have to be able to mute with both hands. A lot of stuff you can get away with bar chords with just using the right hand. Right, and I'm able to block out the sounds really with my right hand there. So what I would recommend doing is just taking a chord, a bar chord, and as you're working on it, making sure that you can play the bar chord without muting first. I'm getting all the notes there. Good, so I'm doing that okay. I have my thumb right behind the fretboard. I have my fingers that I'm arching well enough. I really have my thumb in the middle of the fulcrum of the chord, right? So let's say the 4th fret is the middle of the chord, and I have my thumb right there behind the 4th fret. Sounds great. Okay, now I actually don't want to hear all the notes. I know I'm playing the bar chord right, but I want that palm muted kind of, I guess, Foo Fighter-y sound, right? So, sounds pretty good. Got my right palm resting against near the bridge. Doing all downstrokes with my pick to get that effect. Works pretty well. Okay, cool. So I'm good to go. So resting your fingers, resting your palm, your right palm gently near the bridge, but not on the bridge, will block with the right hand.
How near?
How near? Good question. Doesn't really matter, to be honest. But I wouldn't say not on the bridge. So it could be somewhere in between the sound hole and the bridge if you're on an acoustic. If you're over the sound hole, it's not going to sound good. But if you're somewhere in this range, you're going to be okay.
Zone.
Yeah. And then with the left hand, just lightly draping your fingers across the strings will get that percussive sound. And a lot of the more percussive acoustic guitar players are masters of both kind of muting. So if that's the style that you're looking for, you definitely want to get the basics of muting here and muting here.
That's great. Maybe I'll start to put together in the meantime, like if we talk about something, you mentioned an exercise like that, maybe I'll put together a little list that's like, hey, here's something that you can practice.
It's a great idea.
Awesome. We have time for probably a couple more. It's about 10 of. We're going to wrap this up at 3 p.m. Eastern. Let's see what we have. We touched on this before, but there's a question here about how often should I practice every day, or how many days per week for how long in order to progress. Can you talk just a little bit about? Yeah.
I mean, it depends on your level and what style you want to play. I would say, as a general rule, if you can do longer, then do longer. But if you're going to do an hour once a week, it's not going to help you very much. I'd say like 10 or 15 minutes every day works across levels, to be quite honest. And I know we all have busy lives and a lot going on, but the consistency in your practice is really key, much more than the amount. I have a few students who, are able to practice 4 or 5 hours a day, and good for them. But I mean, I don't have that luxury. I did it one time. But I think if you're, 10 or 15 minutes a day, but you're consistent every single day, you pick up your instrument and you do something with it, that's great. as a beginner, just picking your instrument up and playing a few chords could be practice. Once you're a little bit more advanced and you know the instrument a little bit more, I think the practice needs to be a bit more focused, right? Yeah. With a metronome, or trying to learn a song and playing along with a song that you like and that has all the chords that you've been learning. That's really useful. Practice doesn't have to be boring. It can be playing along with a tune. You have
how do you get people to structure your you're probably about to talk about this, but like how do you structure your students' practice at different levels? Like if they're just beginning, like people who do not play the guitar who are trying to learn the guitar, you have them do what? If they have their chords under their belt and they're working on such and such a skill, you have them do what? Like how do you essentially like break up that 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour a day?
Yeah. So with beginners, I have them learn a specific, so all the open chords, and then a song that uses the open chords that they're learning on a given day, right? So if they're learning, I don't know, let's see. So let's say they're learning how to play the F chord, right? So I might give them the House of the Rising Sun, the chord progression of that. Because it has the F chord in it, right? So then they'd have to practice that. I wouldn't have them do that pattern. I might have them go 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And say, do that 5 or 10 minutes with a metronome. And then along with that, they can learn a scale. So let's learn the A minor scale, because that's the scale that fits this song. That would be in 1 octave. Maybe that would be for 2 weeks. They'd work on that until they master it. And then once they master that, okay, we're going to do the House of the Rising Sun with an arpeggio pattern. And I'll write out the tab and give it to them and say, work on that for 2 weeks. And we'll include with that the A minor scale in 2 octaves. Right? Until they get that down. And then I might say, learn House of the Rising Sun and be able to improvise a little bit to it. So that might be the same tune for, let's say, 2 months. And while they're working on that, I'm also adding some other things so they don't get bored. But they're learning House of the Rising Sun at a higher level, like maybe at an intermediate level, while they're still working on these beginner things. So you're working on things that are like, in your toolbox, in your back pocket, that if someone asked you at a party, hey, do you know this song? Could you play it? I hear you're learning how to play the guitar, and they could do it. And then there's the stuff that they would never show at a party, but they're trying to get it together, and maybe that'll be the one for the next party.
Gotcha. That's good advice. I want to talk about something I saw you doing in that example, which was I'm so glad you used an F chord, because that's one of the main sources of frustration I hear from people is they start learning their open chords and it's like, oh man, I can actually play the guitar, and then they get to F and they're like, I saw that you used the version of F that uses 4 strings, not 6 strings. Talk a little bit about that. How do you approach teaching that chord to your students? You just start there.
Yeah, so I use F as a bridge to learning other bar chords, because it's really the first bar chord you learn, right? You're barring the first fret of the E and the B strings, right? So you're playing those notes simultaneously. And then you're playing the second fret of G with your middle finger, and the third fret of D with your ring finger, right? There it is. Now, a lot of people have trouble with bar chords, and if you start with an F chord, you at least get the sensation of barring, but with only 2 notes. And then when you start to do the 6-string variation of bar chords, which is movable, you at least kind of know what a bar chord should do. You get it. And even though it's harder, you're like, oh, okay, so I need to be playing these notes simultaneously. If you can do it with 2, you build up your confidence and you get the sensation a little bit. And this is actually one of my favorite chord voicings, because one of the things that people often don't learn when they're learning guitar, you learn this as if it's an open chord, but it's not. It's a bar chord. It's an easy bar chord, and you could mistakenly play these strings and make it not a bar chord, but it's a movable bar chord. This is a Jimi Hendrix chord. It's in all of Jimi Hendrix's tunes, and it's a fun little... right? So you can play around with that shape a little more. So I would teach that bar chord first as kind of a bridge between the open chords and a bigger bar chord.
Nice. I think we have time to squeeze in Marty's response, which he has written back to us in real time. So he says, when I played in my teens in the early 80s, it was mostly electric rock. I ranged from the Beatles to Leonard Skinner to AC/DC to Rush. Over time, I got away from that and leaned more to acoustic music. Oh, so it seems like he played quite a bit.
Yeah.
Cat Stevens, more Beatles, Grateful Dead, etc. When I picked up a guitar again, it was acoustic, and I'm doing the same stuff and a little more. Maybe it would be easier if we weren't in a pandemic and I could have an easier time bouncing things off of another player. So it sounds like he actually is just more stuck. Like he's playing the same stuff and maybe he wants to do more. Can you recommend any like knowing kind of where he came from, like what he's into?
Yeah.
Maybe something that would be a good next step for him?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, the Rush stuff is great. I love Rush. Really, Alex Lifeson is an incredible guitar player. What if there's a tune that you used to play that you loved that seems just slightly beyond your reach right now? Is there a way that, striving for that might incentivize you a little bit more? I used to play a lot of shred stuff, and I still kind of have the technique, but sometimes if I try to play like, C Vi or something that I used to play all the time, I don't have necessarily quite the chops that I used to have, the stuff I used to play easily, but I use that to kind of push me, right? Like, okay, if I just work a little bit harder, I know I can get it. I'm a much better musician now, maybe even if my technique isn't what it was when I was 20, right? So, nice. So maybe if there's something that just pushes you a little bit more, choose one of those songs, take one of those, Alex Lifeson solos and like see if you can make it work, in 2 or 3 months, and it'll push you to like, get wherever you're playing and work with the metronome and play along with the recording and try to get it going. Or alternatively, maybe it would make sense for you to do something that's like almost in your wheelhouse, right? That like after 2 weeks you could get it, and then you'll see like, because if you've been playing even in the acoustic way, like you probably have the chops to play a lot of the stuff that you think is slightly out of your capabilities right now. So
there's something interesting about your advice though too, that it's not like skills based. It's like, hey, find something you're into, and then I'm sure you'll have to learn new skills to do that.
Yeah, totally.
Just kind of an interesting thing to keep in mind, probably. Maybe. Marty Peter says he likes that idea. Thanks for the suggestion.
Thanks, Marty.
There you go. So I think maybe that maybe sometimes if you're going on YouTube a lot and you see a lot of people teaching some kind of skill or some kind of thing, you might think you need to do that specific thing to be a better guitarist. But one kind of note that transferred from your advice from last time into this time seems like find out what you want to play and then learn how to play it.
Yeah, totally.
Nice. Well, it is 3 Eastern, and we're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much again for doing this.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for all your great questions, guys.
Yeah, keep them coming. And if you enjoyed your time here, throw it on your Facebook wall. We're going to do it again. If you are watching this later on Facebook or YouTube and you think, oh man, they do this live, how would I know when it's live? You can go to chordbank.com/live and sign up, and we only email you about this thing, and we'll let you know when we're going to do it next. Other than that, thank you, Andres. And people can find you on Instagram at instagram.com/
Andres A. Wilson.
And he will be shredding and playing music that he likes there. Awesome. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye.